Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, an intergenerational report is an opportunity for a government to outline a vision for the nation, to talk to the nation about the challenges and opportunities for the long term, to rise above day-to-day politics, to rise above point scoring, to rise above sledging of previous administrations. But this Treasurer and this government have shown themselves incapable of doing that. The intergenerational report is not meant to be a belated, half-hearted attempt to sell an unfair budget. An intergenerational report is not meant to be an opportunity to sledge previous administrations. An intergenerational report is meant to be about the future. This intergenerational report has 8 pages on the future and 80 pages on the past. This intergenerational report has been politicised like no other. The member for North Sydney is the 3rd Treasurer to bring down an intergenerational report, and he's the first to politicise it in such a blatant manner. The intergenerational report, as the Treasurer himself today said, is a document of the Treasurer, not independent analysis of the Treasury, a document of the Treasurer. But this Treasurer is the first to so blatantly politicise it. Now, Madam Speaker, even as the government attempts to politicise this document, they have not done so honestly or competently. 45 times this document talks about previous policies. On 45 occasions this document talks about previous policies. But when you look closely at these previous policies, Madam Speaker, when you look closely at the previous policies, they are the previous policies of the Treasurer. They are the policies as outlined in his mid-year economic statement. They are the policies as outlined in the document which he owned. Policies like giving $9 billion to the Reserve Bank and increasing spending by $14 billion. His policies, Madam Speaker. Previous policies are previous government policies, the policies of that government. So as they attempt to rewrite history, they don't even do so competently or honestly. They talk about previous policies. Well, yes, policies they once had, policies never embraced by this side, like giving $9 billion to the Reserve Bank. If we're going to have a conversation about the future, let's do so honestly. And let's have a competent and clear exposition of the facts. Now, there are other ways that this document is fundamentally flawed, Madam Speaker. I asked the Treasurer yesterday in the House whether the document would reflect his government's policy of restoring the private health insurance rebate in full. Members would recall that the previous Labor government means-tested the private health insurance rebate to make it fairer, to make it more sustainable, a very important fiscal reform, not a small one, Madam Speaker, saving $25 billion over 10 years or $100 billion over 40. And we did it against the opposition of the Liberal and National Parties, because apparently the age of entitlement is not over for all. But it was done. But the now Prime Minister, as Leader of the Opposition and the then Shadow Treasurer, promised to restore it. They didn't say they'd do it immediately, in fairness. They said they would restore it when they could, within the decade, as the budget returns to surplus. Well, the Treasurer is today predicting a return to surplus in 2028 in his own document. And does the intergenerational report assume that the private health insurance rebate is restored in full? Not a word. Not a word, Madam Speaker. A fundamentally dishonest projection of government policy. Either the Treasurer should walk away from his policy, admit he got it wrong, admit that the private health insurance rebate should be means-tested, admit they will never restore it, or the document should reflect government policy. It does neither of those things. Which is the truth? Madam Speaker, if the Treasurer and the government are going to engage in a discussion about the future, we're in it. But we'll do so honestly. We'll do so based on the facts. We won't do so based on false projections as claimed in this document. And there's another interesting projection in here which honourable members will be extremely interested in, Madam Speaker. It relates to the age pension. Because this government, of course, is changing the indexation of the age pension. This government, of course, is saying that CPI is fair. This government says pensioners should not have their pension linked to average weekly earnings. A fundamentally different approach to this side of the House. When we were in office, we made the indexation fairer. We introduced more ways the pension could be increased, not less. We said pensioners deserve a fair pension linked to the pension, the CPI or a basket of goods which reflected what pensioners actually buy. But no, not good enough for this government. They said, no, pensioners don't deserve that. And they attempted to change the policy. And today we have an acknowledgement for the first time that this isn't fair. Because the government says when they return to surplus, they project that they will return the pension to being linked to average weekly earnings. So poor people will have to be on the pension for the next 12 years. The leaners, apparently, according to the Treasurer, they have to put up with an unfair indexation measure, but apparently into the future then that will be changed. So here we have assumptions and forecasts made not by the Treasury, not by the Department of Finance, not by the Parliamentary Budget Office, but by the member for North Sydney. In his political document, his half-hearted and belated attempt to sell what he has been incapable of selling up until now for the last 10 months, his budget. That's why he's used the intergenerational report, and it is abuse of what the intergenerational report should be used for. Now, Madam Speaker, we know that this government has one way of dealing with demographic change. And there is demographic change in Australia, of course there is, and governments need to deal with it. They have one way, making you work longer and then giving you less when you eventually are allowed to retire by this Treasurer in his grace. He allows you to retire after you have worked longer than any other worker in the developed world. The Treasurer says to carpenters, to bricklayers, to policemen, to nurses, to soldiers, I'm going to make you work until you're 70. I'm going to put the grey army out there laying the bricks, laying the carpets, when they have worked hard their whole life. The member for Kooyong says, no. You're going to work till you're 70 longer than any other developed country in the world, and then we're going to give you less than the age pension when you retire. But there is a better way, Madam Speaker. There is a better way than that. You can invest in the future. You can invest in people's own retirement incomes through superannuation. You can build on that great Labor reform of superannuation. You can take the superannuation guarantee from 9% to 12% and let people save for their own retirement with the help of the government. You can help low-income earners save for their own retirement by giving them a low-income earners superannuation contribution, something this government has taken away. You can actually say to older people, we will continue to ensure that you are paid superannuation, something the previous Labor government did and the Liberal and National Party voted against. They are in no position to lecture anybody. No position. And yes, you well recall, Madam Speaker, the Liberal and National Party voting against it at the time, voting against the policy to let superannuation guarantee compulsorily be paid to people over 70.
No.
An outrageous decision, Madam Speaker, an outrageous decision by the Liberal and National parties, passed in this House with the support of the then members for Lyne and New England. But, Madam Speaker, those changes, increasing the superannuation guarantee and allowing low-income earners the benefit of a contribution from the tax system, some support as people under $37,000 save for their retirement, would have added $500 billion to the savings of the Australian people by 2037. $500 billion. And even more importantly, Madam Speaker, we know that those measures would have reduced the number of people on the full age pension by half by 2050. Now that is how you make the age pension more sustainable. You work with people. You assist low-income earners to save for their own retirement. You say to low-income earners, the carpenters, the plumbers, the cleaners, that they actually deserve a tax concession on their superannuation. If it's good enough for high-income earners and millionaires, it's good enough for cleaners and others in this building and right across the country to get a bit of assistance in saving for their retirement, but not according to this government. Not according to the member for North Sydney, not according to the member for Kooyong, not according to the Prime Minister. They say no, the only way is to cut. We're going to make you work longer and we're going to give you less when we eventually allow you to retire. Well, there is a better way. I welcome the fact that the Treasurer in his remarks a few moments ago for the first time recognised there are alternatives. He said there are alternatives. Well, you bet there are. You bet there are, Madam Speaker. There are a heap of alternatives and you're going to see them, because there are better ways of saving for the future. There are better ways of dealing with demographic change. It's not all about making people work harder and longer. It's not all about taking things away from people, Madam Speaker. It's about actually helping people save for their own retirement, to give them a dignified retirement, to give them a chance to live in retirement without reliance on the full age pension, but to actually be able to use the superannuation system to build on our strengths to build on the strengths of that great Australian financial system, our great financial services providers, who know how to invest for the future, who know how to maximise people's retirement incomes. That should be available to every working Australian. That should be available to every working Australian, not just those who can afford to get financial advice, not that those who can afford to get massive tax concessions from this government, but those who are able to work hard and save for themselves and provide for themselves, and they get zero support from this government, and all they get is lectures. All they get is lectures about being leaners and not lifters. All they get is lectures about being takers and not makers. All they get is told is that they're a drain on the public purse. And how dare they expect an age pension? And how dare they expect an age pension which actually increases with growth in the Australian wages and Australian economy? How dare they expect the Australian government to look out for them? How could they expect such a thing? How could they expect from this government to get any support? Well, they can't expect to get any support. Not from this member for North Sydney. Not from this member for North Sydney, who is so out of touch with the aspirations of ordinary Australian people. Not from the member for Kooyong, who lectures them if they're lower middle income earners, who takes it away from them, whose main focus is actually providing more tax concessions to people on high incomes and less to people on low. It says it all about the priorities of this government. A government which brings down a flawed document in an attempt to sell their own unfair and flawed budget. A flawed sales job which is about to be supplemented by taxpayers' funds on an advertising campaign, a document brought down in breach of the law a month after it should have been, in breach of the Charter of Budget Honesty Act, the Treasurer of Australia in breach of a law he is meant to be administering. He says to the Australian people, I will enforce the law. Well, how about you start complying with it? How about you actually start by complying with your own law? Instead of beating your chest about enforcing the law on others, you could start by complying with it. And you could start with a bit of honesty. We're not seeing any in this document.